The thunderclap that shattered the summer sky mirrored the upheaval in Olivia Spencer's life as she clutched the remnants of her shredded wedding dress, standing in the doorway of the abandoned church where she'd been left to face humiliation alone. The year was 1878, and Dry Creek, Colorado, was meant to be the starting place of her new life, not the site of her most profound disappointment. Rain began to fall, fat droplets that quickly transformed into a downpour, but Olivia made no move to seek shelter. Her chestnut hair, once elaborately pinned for the occasion, now hung in damp strands around her face. She'd waited 3 hours for Maxwell Holloway, the banker's son who had promised her the world and delivered nothing but shame. "You'll catch your death standing there," a deep voice called from behind her. Olivia turned, dignity straightening her spine despite the mud staining the hem of her once pristine gown. A man sat atop a dappled gray horse, rain dripping from the brim of his worn hat. His face was partially obscured by shadow, but she could make out the strong line of his jaw, the breadth of his shoulders beneath a well-worn duster. "I suspect pneumonia would be a kindness compared to what I've already endured today," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, leading his horse closer. As he stepped into the light spilling from the church windows, Olivia saw him clearly sun-bronzed skin, eyes the color of a summer storm, and a face that spoke of hard living and harder choices. "Name's Beckett James," he said, removing his hat and revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Folks call me Beck, Olivia Spencer." She didn't offer her hand. What was the point of social niceties when she stood drenched and abandoned on what should have been her wedding day? "You appear to be in need of assistance, Miss Spencer." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Unless you can restore a woman's dignity or bring a coward to justice, I doubt there's much assistance to be had." Beck's gaze traveled from the empty church to her bedraggled appearance, understanding dawning in his eyes. "He didn't show." "No," Olivia said, chin lifting. "He did not." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the steady drum of rain on the church roof. Then Beck held out his hand, an unexpected gesture that caught her off guard. "Let me take you somewhere dry. My sister runs the boarding house in town. She can help you get sorted." Olivia hesitated, years of proper upbringing warring with her current desperate circumstances. She'd come west from Boston with such high hopes, corresponding with Maxwell for months before agreeing to marry him. Now she stood friendless, nearly penniless, with nowhere to go. "I have no means to pay for lodging," she admitted, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Beck's expression softened, not with pity which she would have despised, but with a quiet understanding that somehow eased the burning humiliation in her chest. "Rosa won't turn away someone in need," he said simply. "Besides, I reckon you've had enough trouble for one day without worrying about coin." Perhaps it was exhaustion, or the realization that pride would serve her poorly in her current situation, but Olivia found herself nodding. Beck helped her onto his horse before swinging up behind her, his presence solid and warm at her back as they rode through the downpour toward town. Dry Creek was a single main street flanked by wooden buildings in various states of repair. Despite the rain, Olivia could feel curious eyes tracking their progress from behind curtained windows. By tomorrow, everyone would know of her disgrace. The boarding house sat at the edge of town, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and neatly painted shutters. Light glowed from within, warm and inviting against the gray deluge. A woman appeared at the door as they approached, tall and sturdy, with Beck's same storm-colored eyes and a no-nonsense set to her mouth. "Beckett James, what trouble have you brought me now?" She called, but there was affection beneath the scolding tone. "Not trouble, Rosa, just someone who could use a hot meal and a dry bed." Beck dismounted and reached up to help Olivia down, his hands strong and steady at her waist. Rosa's expression shifted as she took in Olivia's bedraggled wedding dress. "Oh, you poor thing," she said, ushering her inside without further questions. The boarding house was clean and modestly furnished, with the scent of fresh bread lingering in the air. Rosa led Olivia upstairs to a small but tidy room, bringing hot water for washing and a simple cotton nightgown. "It's not much," she apologized, "but it's clean. We'll talk in the morning when you've had some rest." Alone at last, Olivia sank onto the edge of the bed. She should have been spending this night in Maxwell's fine house on the hill, beginning her life as Mrs. Holloway. Instead, she was a charity case, dependent on the kindness of strangers. The tears she'd been holding back all day finally came, silent and hot against her cheeks, as she mourned not the loss of Maxwell, whom she now recognized as unworthy of her affection, but the death of her dreams and the uncertain future that lay ahead. Morning arrived with clear skies and birdsong, a stark contrast to the tumult of the previous day. Olivia dressed in the simple clothes Rosa had left for her, a skirt and shirtwaist that were slightly too large but clean and serviceable. Downstairs, she found Beck seated at the kitchen table, his hat beside him as he nursed a cup of coffee. He rose when she entered, an old-world courtesy that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. "Miss Spencer," he greeted her, "hope you slept well." "As well as could be expected," she replied honestly. Rosa bustled in from the pantry, arms full of baking supplies. "Sit down and have some breakfast," she instructed. "Can't solve problems on an empty stomach." Over plates of eggs and biscuits, Olivia explained her situation, how she'd come west as a mail-order bride, spending the last of her inheritance on the journey, only to be abandoned without explanation. "Maxwell Holloway," Beck muttered, his jaw tightening. "I might have known. You know him?" Olivia asked, surprised. "Know of him," Beck corrected. "Man's got a reputation for making promises he doesn't keep." Rosa refilled their coffee cups with a grim expression. "That's putting it mildly." "You're not the first girl he's left high and dry, though usually they don't make it all the way to the altar before he shows his true colors." The knowledge that she wasn't the first victim of Maxwell's faithlessness offered cold comfort. "I suppose I should be grateful I discovered his character before we were wed," Olivia said, though the words stuck in her throat. "What will you do now?" Beck asked, his direct gaze making it impossible to look away. It was the question she'd been avoiding since the moment she realized Maxwell wasn't coming. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have some education. I taught school in Boston before coming west. Perhaps there's need for a teacher here." "Not enough children yet," Rosa said with regret. "Dry Creek's still growing. Most families with young ones teach them at home." Olivia's heart sank. Teaching was her only marketable skill, and without it, "I need work," she said firmly. "Any honest work. I won't be a burden on your kindness." Beck and Rosa exchanged a look laden with unspoken communication. "I might have a solution," Beck said slowly. "Temporary, at least until you decide what's next. I've got a ranch about 10 miles outside town. Nothing fancy, but I'm making it work. Problem is, I've taken on care of my nephew, my brother's boy, since my brother and his wife passed from the fever last winter." Olivia listened, sensing where this was heading. "Billy's a good kid, 8 years old, sharp as a tack. But he needs proper learning, and I'm away too often tending the herd. I've been meaning to hire someone to look after him, teach him his letters and numbers better than I can." Beck hesitated. "The pay wouldn't be much, but there's a small cabin on the property where you'd have privacy, and meals would be included." It wasn't the future she'd envisioned when she'd boarded the train in Boston, but it was an offer made in good faith, which was more than she could say for Maxwell Holloway. "I'd need to meet the boy first," Olivia said cautiously. Beck's face broke into a smile that transformed his rugged features, revealing a glimpse of genuine warmth. "Of course. He's with my neighbor, Mrs. Gunderson, for a few days while I had business in town. I'll take you out there today if you're willing." Rosa watched their exchange with thoughtful eyes. "It could be a good arrangement for you both," she offered. "Beck's a fair man, and that boy could use a woman's influence." Olivia considered her options, which were admittedly few. Return east in disgrace and poverty. Seek employment in town where everyone would know her as the woman Maxwell Holloway had jilted, or accept this unexpected offer that would at least give her time to regroup and plan her next steps. "I'll meet the boy," she decided, "and we'll see from there." Beck nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "I'll ready the wagon. It's a bumpy ride, but easier than horseback in that skirt." 2 hours later, they were traveling along a rutted trail that wound through rolling grasslands dotted with stands of pine and aspen. The landscape was vastly different from the crowded streets of Boston, with a wild beauty that spoke to something deep within Olivia despite her circumstances. Beck drove the wagon with capable hands, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing bits of local history. He wasn't a talkative man by nature, but his quiet confidence was oddly reassuring. "How did you come to ranching?" Olivia asked as they crossed a shallow creek, the horses splashing through sun-dappled water. Beck was silent for so long she thought he might not answer, but finally he spoke. "Wasn't always a rancher. Rode with the cavalry during the war, then spent some years drifting. Did whatever work I could find, cowhand, tracker, even some bounty hunting when times were lean." He adjusted his hat against the sun. "5 years back, I won this land in a poker game from a man too drunk to know what he was wagering. Figured it was a sign to put down roots." "And your nephew?" Olivia prompted gently. Pain flashed across Beck's face, quickly masked. "My brother Daniel was always the settled one. Had a homestead up north with his wife Sarah. Good people. The fever took them both within days of each other. Billy had nowhere else to go." "I'm sorry," Olivia said, and meant it. She knew something of loss herself, having buried both parents before her 20th birthday. Beck acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "Billy's still grieving, doesn't talk much these days, but he's a good boy, just needs time and stability." They crested a hill, and suddenly the ranch spread before them, a modest but well-maintained cabin with a barn and corral, nestled in a protected valley with a creek running alongside. Several dozen cattle grazed on the surrounding grassland, and a smaller cabin stood a short distance from the main house. "It's lovely," Olivia said truthfully. Beck's expression was unreadable. "It's not much compared to what Holloway could have offered." "Perhaps not in material terms," she replied, "but I'm beginning to think there are other measures of worth." Something shifted in Beck's eyes, a flicker of respect that warmed her more than it should have. Mrs. Gunderson proved to be a robust woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She greeted Beck with familiar ease and assessed Olivia with frank curiosity. "So you're the teacher Beck's found for Billy," she said, ushering them into her modest home. "About time. Boy needs structure." Billy was sitting at the kitchen table, a thin child with solemn eyes and Beck's dark hair. He looked up warily as they entered, his gaze flickering between the adults. "Billy, this is Miss Spencer," Beck said, his voice gentling. "She might be staying with us for a while to help with your schooling." The boy studied Olivia silently, his expression guarded. Then, with careful deliberation, he stood and offered his hand as if he were a grown man. "How do you do, Miss Spencer?" he asked in a voice that was trying very hard to be steady. Olivia's heart melted a little at his grave courtesy. She shook his hand with equal seriousness. "I'm very pleased to meet you, Billy. Your uncle tells me you're quite bright." A flicker of pride crossed his face before it disappeared behind caution again. "I can read some," he offered, "and I'm good with numbers." "That's an excellent start," Olivia said. "Would you mind showing me what you've been learning? Perhaps we could read together for a bit." Billy glanced at his uncle, who nodded encouragingly. The boy retreated to a shelf and returned with a worn copy of Robinson Crusoe, handling it with reverence. For the next hour, Olivia sat with Billy, listening as he read aloud, gently correcting his pronunciation and explaining unfamiliar words. His initial wariness gradually softened as they discussed the story, revealing flashes of natural curiosity and intelligence. Beck and Mrs. Gunderson observed from the kitchen, speaking in low tones that Olivia couldn't quite make out. Finally, Beck approached. "It's getting late. We should head back to the ranch if you're to see where you'd be staying," he said. "That is, if you're still considering my offer." Olivia looked at Billy, who was watching her with an expression caught between hope and resignation, the look of a child who had learned not to expect people to stay. "I believe I'd like to accept your offer, Mr. James," she said. "At least on a trial basis, if that's agreeable to you. Relief washed over Beck's features. "More than agreeable," he said and turned to Billy. "Go gather your things, partner, we're heading home." The smaller cabin on Beck's property was simple but clean, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, plus a small bedroom. Basic furniture, a bed, table, chairs, and a bookshelf had been arranged with care, and fresh wildflowers stood in a jar on the windowsill. "Rosa sent some things ahead when I stopped by this morning," Beck explained, noting Olivia's surprise at the flowers. "Said a woman needs her own space fixed proper." "It's perfect," Olivia said, genuinely touched by the consideration. After the chaotic events of the past 2 days, the quiet simplicity of the cabin felt like a haven. "We'll work out details of your duties and such tomorrow," Beck said, shifting awkwardly by the door. "For now, get settled. Supper's at sundown in the main house." Left alone, Olivia sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by how quickly her life had changed. 2 days ago, she had been preparing to marry a man she thought would give her security and companionship. Now she was living in a cabin on a remote ranch, employed as a governess to an orphaned boy. Yet despite everything, a curious sense of peace settled over her. Perhaps it was the honesty of her current situation, no false promises or pretenses, just a straightforward exchange of her skills for lodging and modest wages. At supper, Billy was subdued but polite, watching Olivia with careful attention as if trying to solve a puzzle. Beck kept the conversation flowing, asking about her teaching experience and sharing stories about ranch life that drew occasional smiles from his nephew. As days turned into weeks, Olivia settled into a routine. Mornings were devoted to Billy's lessons, afternoons to helping with household tasks, and sometimes riding with Billy to check the closer pastures. Evenings often found the three of them on the porch, Billy reading aloud while Beck mended tack or cleaned his guns. The boy was blossoming under her attention, his natural intelligence finding outlet in the books she ordered from Denver. More importantly, he was beginning to trust her, his initial reserve giving way to occasional bursts of childish enthusiasm that made her heart swell. Beck, too, was changing or perhaps revealing more of himself. Behind his taciturn exterior lay a man of integrity and unexpected gentleness. She'd seen him calm a panicked horse with nothing but soft words, watched him patiently teach Billy to whittle, observed his fierce protectiveness toward those he considered under his care. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching lightning play across distant mountains, Billy finally asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. "Miss Spencer, are you going to leave when winter comes?" Olivia glanced at Beck, whose expression remained carefully neutral, though she caught a flicker of tension in his jaw. "I hadn't made plans to," she answered truthfully. "Do you want me to stay?" Billy nodded solemnly. "You make Uncle Beck smile more. And you don't treat me like I'm stupid when I ask questions." "Billy," Beck admonished gently, but Olivia shook her head. "It's all right," she said. "I appreciate his honesty." She turned back to the boy. "As long as you and your uncle want me here, and as long as I'm useful, I'd like to stay." Relief crossed Billy's face, and he returned to his book with renewed concentration. But Olivia was aware of Beck watching her, his gaze thoughtful and perhaps a touch warmer than before. Later, after Billy had gone to bed, Beck joined her as she stood gazing at the star-filled sky. "Did you mean what you said?" he asked quietly. "About staying," Olivia considered her answer carefully. "Yes," she said finally. "I've found more peace here than I expected. Billy needs stability and she hesitated. I've come to care for him, for this place." Something unspoken hung in the air between them, a current of feeling neither was ready to acknowledge. "Winter's harsh here," Beck warned. "Not like back east. Snow can cut us off for weeks." "I'm stronger than I look," Olivia replied, a slight smile lifting the corners of her mouth. "And I'm not afraid of difficulty." Beck studied her face in the moonlight as if searching for something. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him. "No," he agreed softly. "You're not afraid of much, Olivia Spencer." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "Good night, Beck," she said, suddenly needing space to collect her thoughts. "Good night, Olivia," he answered, and the way he said her name felt like a promise neither of them was ready to make. The arrival of autumn brought new rhythms to ranch life. Beck was often away at dawn, working with his small crew to round up cattle from summer pastures and prepare for winter. Billy's lessons now included practical skills: how to stack firewood properly, identify useful plants, and prepare for the coming cold. Olivia found herself drawn into the preparations, learning to preserve fruits and vegetables under Mrs. Gunderson's tutelage, helping to mend winter clothing, and even assisting with the butchering when Beck brought down a deer. "You're taking to ranch life better than I expected," Beck commented one evening as they worked together in the barn, Olivia holding a lantern while he repaired a broken stall door. "Is that a compliment, Mr. James?" She teased, more comfortable now with the easy banter that had developed between them. "Just an observation," he replied, but his eyes crinkled at the corners in a way that made her pulse quicken. Most city women would have run screaming after their first cattle drive. "Perhaps I'm not most women," she challenged. Beck paused, hammer in midair, and looked at her with an intensity that stole her breath. "No," he agreed quietly, "you most certainly are not." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken feeling, until Billy's voice called from outside, breaking the spell. As they prepared to face their first winter together, unexpected visitors arrived at the ranch: Maxwell Holloway and his father, the banker. Olivia was hanging laundry when their expensive carriage rolled into the yard, and her heart lurched painfully at the sight of the man who had humiliated her. Beck emerged from the barn, his posture stiffening as he recognized the visitors. He moved to stand protectively near Olivia, his presence a silent bulwark. "Miss Spencer," Maxwell called, stepping down from the carriage with affected graciousness. "What a pleasant surprise to find you here." Olivia lifted her chin, refusing to show weakness. "I doubt it's a surprise at all, Mr. Holloway. I imagine you've known exactly where I was these past months." Maxwell had the grace to look uncomfortable, adjusting his fashionable coat. "There was a misunderstanding. I've come to make amends." "There was no misunderstanding," Beck interjected, his voice dangerously quiet. "You left her standing at the altar." The elder Holloway stepped forward, his florid face set in lines of disapproval. "Young woman, my son has come to offer you a second chance. You'd be wise to listen." Anger flared in Olivia's chest. "A second chance." "As if I were the one who behaved dishonorably," Maxwell moved closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Olivia, I was a fool. I had cold feet, that's all. But I've realized my mistake. We can still be married. Father has agreed to build us a house in town, and you'll want for nothing." Olivia stared at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time: a weak man hiding behind wealth and privilege, offering her a gilded cage rather than a true partnership. "No," she said simply. Maxwell blinked in confusion. "No, but surely you understand what I'm offering. You're living in a cabin on a struggling ranch, working as a governess. I'm offering you security, position in town. You're offering me exactly what you offered before," Olivia interrupted. "Empty promises from a man who runs when faced with commitment. No thank you, Mr. Holloway. I've found something far more valuable here." Beck shifted beside her, and though she didn't look at him, she could feel the tension in his body ease slightly. "You can't be serious," the elder Holloway sputtered. "James barely makes ends meet. What kind of future can he offer you?" The assumption that her relationship with Beck was romantic caught Olivia off guard, but before she could correct it, Beck spoke. "The kind where promises are kept," he said evenly. "The kind where a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account." Maxwell's face darkened with anger. "You've turned her against me," he accused. "She was perfectly willing to marry me before I knew your true character," Olivia finished. "Please leave, Mr. Holloway. There's nothing for you here." For a moment she thought Maxwell might argue further, but his father placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Come, son. The woman has made her choice, poor as it may be." As the carriage pulled away, Olivia realized she was trembling not with fear or regret, but with a strange exhilaration. For the first time since arriving in Colorado, she felt truly free of Maxwell's shadow. Beck watched her carefully. "You all right?" "Better than all right," she admitted. I think I needed that confrontation to fully close that chapter." His expression was unreadable, but his voice was gentle when he asked, "Did you mean what you said about finding something valuable here?" Olivia met his gaze steadily. Every word. Something shifted between them in that moment, a tentative acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first rainy night. But before either could speak further, Billy came running from the direction of the creek, eager to show them a fish he'd caught, and the moment passed. Yet something had changed. In the days that followed, Olivia caught Beck watching her with a new awareness, his customary reserve softening when their eyes met. For her part, she found herself noticing details she'd tried to ignore: the strength of his hands, the rare brilliance of his smile, the quiet consideration he showed in 100 small ways. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Billy was ecstatic, building snowmen and learning to track animals in the fresh powder. Beck was more serious, checking supplies and reinforcing the barn against the harsher weather to come. Olivia woke one morning to find Beck already gone, his tracks in the snow leading toward the high pasture where some cattle were still grazing. By midday, the sky had darkened ominously, and wind began to howl around the cabin eaves. "Storm's coming, Mrs. Gunderson declared, having arrived that morning to help with mending. "Bad one, by the feel of it." Olivia moved to the window, anxiety tightening her chest as she peered at the threatening sky. "Beck's still out there. He knows these mountains," Mrs. Gunderson reassured her. "He'll head back when he sees the weather turning." But as afternoon faded into evening with no sign of Beck, Olivia's worry deepened. The storm had arrived in full force, snow driving horizontally past the windows, the wind's moan rising to a shriek around the cabin corners. Billy sat by the fire trying to focus on his book but constantly glancing at the door. "Uncle Beck will be fine," he said with forced confidence. "He's the best tracker in the territory. He always finds his way home." Olivia squeezed his shoulder, offering comfort she didn't entirely feel. "Of course he will." Mrs. Gunderson prepared a hearty stew for dinner, but none of them had much appetite. As night fell and the storm showed no signs of abating, she decided to stay rather than attempt the journey back to her own cabin. "We'll make up a bed for you in the main room," Olivia suggested, grateful for the older woman's steady presence. Billy was reluctant to go to bed, but eventually exhaustion won out. Olivia tucked him in, promising to wake him the moment his uncle returned, alone by the fire with Mrs. Gunderson. Olivia could no longer hide her fear. "What if he's hurt out there, or lost in this whiteout?" The older woman studied her with knowing eyes. "You care for him a great deal, don't you?" Olivia didn't bother denying it. "More than I ever thought possible," she admitted. "When I came west to marry Maxwell, I thought I was being practical, choosing security and comfortable companionship. But with Beck," she struggled to find words. "With Beck, I feel truly seen, respected, and when he smiles, really smiles, it's like the sun coming out." Mrs. Gunderson nodded sagely. "That boy's had his share of hardship, lost his parents young, then his brother last year. He's built walls to protect himself." "I know," Olivia said softly, "but sometimes I think those walls might be coming down, at least for me." "They are," the older woman confirmed. "I've known Beckett James for 5 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you when you're not watching." Hope fluttered in Olivia's chest, quickly replaced by renewed fear. "But what good is any of that if he's freezing to death out there right now? Have faith, Mrs. Gunderson counseled. Beck survived worse than this storm. Dawn broke with the storm still raging. Olivia had dozed fitfully by the fire, starting awake at every sound, hoping it might be Beck returning. Billy emerged from his room, his young face tight with worry when he saw his uncle hadn't returned. "We need to go find him," he declared, already reaching for his coat. "Billy, no," Olivia said firmly. "This storm is too dangerous. Your uncle wouldn't want you risking yourself." "But he might be hurt," the boy protested, tears threatening. "The best thing we can do is keep the home fires burning so he has something to aim for," Mrs. Gunderson said practically, "and pray this storm blows itself out soon." By midday, the wind had begun to ease, though snow still fell steadily. Olivia stood at the window, straining to see through the whiteness when a dark shape materialized at the edge of the yard. "Someone's coming," she cried, hope surging. It was Beck, but he wasn't alone. He was leading his horse, which appeared to be carrying a second person. Olivia grabbed her shawl and rushed outside, heedless of the snow, with Billy close behind. As they approached, she could see that Beck was supporting a young woman who clung weakly to the saddle, her face pale beneath a frosting of snow. "Thank God," Beck breathed when he saw them. "Need help," found her half frozen by the creek. Together they managed to get the woman inside and settled near the fire. She was hardly more than a girl, perhaps 18, with delicate features and honey-colored hair. Her clothes, though of good quality, were woefully inadequate for the weather, while Mrs. Gunderson tended to the stranger. Olivia turned to Beck, relief making her knees weak. "Are you all right?" she asked, eyes scanning him for injuries. He nodded, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "Found her just in time. Another hour in that storm and she'd have been beyond help." Billy had attached himself to Beck's side, refusing to let go of his uncle's arm. "I knew you'd come back," he said fiercely. "I told Miss Spencer you always find your way home." Beck ruffled the boy's hair, a gesture of affection that spoke volumes. "Had extra motivation this time," he said, his eyes meeting Olivia's over Billy's head. The young woman regained consciousness slowly, confusion clouding her features as she took in her unfamiliar surroundings. "You're safe," Olivia assured her, offering a cup of broth. "Mr. James found you in the storm." "My father," the girl whispered hoarsely. "Is he?" Beck shook his head gravely. "There was no one else when I found you, just tracks already being covered by snow." Tears filled the girl's eyes. "We were traveling to Denver. Our stagecoach was held up yesterday morning. The robbers took everything, shot the driver. My father and I escaped during the confusion, but we got separated in the storm." Her voice broke. "He was trying to find help." "What's your name, child?" Mrs. Gunderson asked gently. "Abigail Turner," she replied. "My father was Judge William Turner." Beck straightened, recognition crossing his face. "Judge Turner from Kansas City. He was expected in Denver for the Patterson trial." Abigail nodded weakly. "Father was to testify against the Patterson gang. That's why they attacked the stage, I think, to prevent his testimony." The information cast a more sinister light on what had seemed a tragic accident. If the Patterson gang, notorious outlaws who had terrorized stagecoach routes for years, had targeted Judge Turner specifically, they might not be satisfied with the possibility that the storm had finished their work. "We need to get word to the marshal in Denver," Beck said grimly. "And search for the judge as soon as this storm breaks." "You just got back," Olivia protested. "You need rest." Beck's expression softened as he looked at her. "I'll rest a few hours, but if there's any chance the judge is alive out there, we have to try." The storm finally subsided late that afternoon, leaving a transformed landscape of pristine drifts and snow-laden trees. Beck organized a search party with his ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders. But their efforts over the next 2 days yielded nothing but the grim discovery of the stagecoach driver's body. Abigail bore the news of her father's likely fate with quiet dignity, though Olivia often heard her weeping softly at night. The girl was recovering physically, but the emotional wounds would take far longer to heal. What will happen to her? Olivia asked Beck as they stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over the snow-covered valley. "She has an aunt in San Francisco," Beck replied. "I've sent a telegram, but it will take time for the response to reach us, especially with the passes snowed in." "She'll stay with us until then," Olivia said with certainty. Beck glanced at her, a smile touching his lips. "I was hoping you'd say that. You've got a way of making this place feel like a real home, Olivia." The warmth in his voice sent a flutter through her chest. "It feels like home to me too," she admitted. "More than Boston ever did." Beck turned to face her fully, something unspoken in his eyes. For a breathless moment, Olivia thought he might reach for her, but the sound of Billy calling from inside broke the spell. As winter deepened its hold on the mountains, life at the ranch settled into a new pattern. Abigail, gradually emerging from her grief, began to help with household tasks and Billy's lessons. The girl had a natural gift for teaching and a sweet disposition that endeared her to everyone, especially Billy. Olivia found herself watching the growing bond between Abigail and the boy with mixed emotions. The young woman was everything a child might want in a mother figure: gentle, patient, well-educated, and from a similar background of privilege that Billy's parents had known before their deaths. One evening, as Olivia was returning from gathering eggs, she overheard a conversation between Beck and Abigail on the porch. "You've been very kind to me, Mr. James," Abigail was saying, her voice soft in the winter twilight. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "No need for repayment," Beck replied. "Any decent man would have done the same." "Not every man would have risked his life in that storm," Abigail countered, "or opened his home to a stranger indefinitely. You're a good man, Beckett James." There was a pause, and Olivia found herself holding her breath, unable to move away yet feeling like an intruder. "Billy's taken quite a shine to you," Beck said finally. "He hasn't connected with anyone that way since his parents died, except maybe Olivia." "Miss Spencer is wonderful with him," Abigail agreed. "You're fortunate to have found her." "More than fortunate," Beck said, his voice dropping to a register that sent a shiver down Olivia's spine. "Sometimes I think she was meant to come here, even if the way it happened was all wrong." "Because of the jilting?" Abigail asked cautiously. "Billy mentioned something about that," Beck sighed. "Holloway's loss was my gain, though I'd never tell her that. She deserved better than to be humiliated that way." "Perhaps it was fate," Abigail suggested, bringing her to where she was truly needed. Olivia didn't hear Beck's response, as a chicken suddenly squawked at her feet, forcing her to move. By the time she'd composed herself and approached the house openly, the moment on the porch had passed. But Beck's words echoed in her mind that night as she lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling of her small cabin. "More than fortunate. She was meant to come here." The certainty in his voice suggested feelings deeper than mere appreciation for her work with Billy, yet doubt still nagged at her. Beck was an honorable man who had taken her in when she was desperate. Perhaps his feelings were merely protective or worse, pitying. And now there was Abigail Young, beautiful, well-bred, clearly admiring of Beck, a more suitable match by society's standards. The arrival of a telegram a week later brought news that Abigail's aunt was arranging for her travel to San Francisco as soon as the mountain passes were clear, likely in early spring. The girl received the news with mixed emotions: relief at having family to turn to, but reluctance to leave the safety and warmth she'd found at the ranch. "I'll miss all of you terribly," she confessed over dinner that night. "You've become like family to me." Billy's face fell. "Do you have to go?" "You could stay and help with my lessons." "That's Miss Spencer's job," Beck reminded him gently, "and Abigail has her own family waiting for her." Olivia smiled encouragingly at the girl, ignoring the twinge of relief she felt. "You'll always be welcome here, Abigail. Perhaps you could visit in the summer when travel is easier." Later, as she was helping Beck clear the table, he spoke quietly so only she could hear. "Thank you for being so gracious with Abigail. Some women might have resented another female presence in the house." Olivia looked up at him, startled. "Why would I resent her? She's been through a terrible ordeal." Beck studied her face with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "Most women in your position might see her as competition." "My position," Olivia echoed, suddenly uncertain of his meaning. Before Beck could respond, Billy burst into the kitchen with a question about his arithmetic lesson, and the moment was lost. But the implication of Beck's words lingered, raising questions Olivia wasn't sure how to answer. As winter slowly loosened its grip on the mountains, bringing the first hints of spring to the valley, Olivia found herself at a crossroads. Her original agreement with Beck had been temporary, a solution to her immediate problem after being jilted. Now, nearly 9 months had passed, and no further discussion of her future had taken place. Did Beck assume she would stay indefinitely? Did she want to? The answer to the second question was simple: yes, she had found contentment here that she'd never known before. But the nature of her place in the household remained ambiguous, and increasingly that ambiguity troubled her. The opportunity to clarify matters came unexpectedly. A letter arrived from Boston. Her childhood friend Alina had tracked her down through the postmaster in Dry Creek, concerned after months without word. Alina's letter contained news that caused Olivia to gasp aloud as she read it at the kitchen table. Bad news. Beck asked, looking up from the ledger where he was calculating spring planting costs. Surprising news, Olivia corrected. My uncle has died, my father's brother whom I barely knew. Apparently he's left me a small inheritance, not a fortune, but enough to. She hesitated. Enough to what? Beck prompted, his expression unreadable. Enough to give me choices, she finished carefully. To start fresh somewhere if I wished. A shadow crossed Beck's face so quickly she might have imagined it. I see, he said, his voice deliberately neutral. And is that what you wish? To start fresh elsewhere, Olivia studied him, wishing she could read the thoughts behind his guarded expression. I don't know, she answered honestly. I've found happiness here that I never expected, but I'm still living in a strange limbo, not quite family, not quite employee. Beck was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving her face. Finally, he closed the ledger and stood. Walk with me, he said. There's something I want to show you. Curious, Olivia followed him outside. The day was mild for early spring, the snow retreating to reveal patches of mud and the first green shoots of new grass. Beck led her past the barn and up a gentle slope to a point overlooking the entire valley. I come here sometimes to think, he said, gazing out over his land. To remember why I stopped drifting and decided to build something lasting. Olivia stood beside him, the breeze lifting tendrils of hair from her face. It's beautiful, she said softly. When I won this land, Beck continued, I had no real plan beyond survival. Each season was just about making it to the next. Then Daniel and Sarah died, and suddenly I had Billy to consider, a future to build not just for myself but for him. He turned to face her, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. And then you arrived, standing in that church doorway in your ruined wedding dress, too proud to break even when your world had just collapsed. Olivia's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. You changed everything, Olivia. This place was a house before, you made it a home. Beck took a step closer. Billy adores you, he's thriving under your care, and he paused, seeming to gather courage. I find myself counting the minutes until I see you each morning and watching the cabin light at night, knowing you're there. Hope bloomed in Olivia's chest, but she needed clarity. What are you saying, Beck? I'm saying I don't want you to use that inheritance to start fresh somewhere else, he said bluntly. I'm saying I want you to stay, not as Billy's teacher, not as a guest or employee, but as. He took a deep breath. As my wife, if you'll have me. The words hung in the air between them, momentous and transformative. Olivia stared at him, searching his face for any sign of hesitation or doubt, but found only earnest vulnerability. You want to marry me? She whispered, hardly daring to believe it. Beck reached for her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. I love you, Olivia Spencer. I think I started falling the moment you looked me in the eye and told me pneumonia would be a kindness compared to being jilted. A laugh escaped her, half joy and half disbelief. That's hardly the most romantic beginning to a love story. Maybe not, he agreed, a smile lighting his eyes, but it's our beginning, and I'd like the chance to write the rest of the story with you if you feel the same. Olivia stepped closer, her free hand rising to touch his face. I do feel the same, she admitted. I've been afraid to acknowledge it, afraid of being hurt again, afraid of misreading your kindness as something more. Beck turned his face to press a kiss against her palm. It was always something more. From the first day, something in me recognized something in you, a strength, a belonging. I just wasn't sure I deserved someone like you. Someone like me, Olivia echoed. A jilted bride with no prospects. Someone educated and refined, Beck corrected. Someone who could have a much easier life than a rancher's wife. Olivia shook her head, moving closer until she could feel the warmth of him. I don't want easy, I want real. I want someone who keeps his promises and faces difficulties head on. I want you, Beckett James. The last barrier between them dissolved as Beck pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of months of restrained longing. Olivia melted against him, her arms twining around his neck as she returned the kiss with equal fervor. When they finally separated, both breathless, Beck rested his forehead against hers. "I'll spend my life making sure you never doubt you're loved," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. "Every day, in every way I can." Tears pricked Olivia's eyes at the sincerity in his words. "That's the most beautiful promise anyone has ever made to me," she whispered, "and one I intend to hold you to." Beck smiled, the full radiance of it transforming his face. "I'm counting on it." They returned to the house hand in hand, both aware that they were crossing a threshold into a new chapter of their lives. Billy looked up from his books as they entered, his quick eyes taking in their clasped hands and flushed faces. "Are you going to be my aunt now?" He asked Olivia directly, surprising them both with his perception. Beck cleared his throat. "If Miss Spencer agrees to marry me, she'd be your aunt, yes." Billy considered this for a moment, then nodded decisively. "Good. I was hoping you'd ask her soon, Mrs. Gunderson said you were taking too long." Beck laughed, the sound rich and unrestrained. "Did she now? Seems everyone's been waiting on me to come to my senses." "Some men need more time to recognize what's right in front of them," Olivia teased, her heart light with happiness. The news of their engagement spread quickly through the small community. Rosa was delighted, declaring she'd known from the first night that Olivia was exactly what her brother needed. Mrs. Gunderson smugly accepted congratulations for her matchmaking insights. Even Abigail, preparing for her journey to San Francisco, expressed genuine pleasure at their happiness. Only Maxwell Holloway's reaction was sour. Encountering Beck in town, he made a disparaging remark about Olivia settling for a rough rancher after failing to secure a gentleman. Beck's response was measured but firm. "The difference between us, Holloway, is that I recognize the value of what I have. You're still trying to buy what can't be purchased." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Maxwell sputtering. Spring arrived in earnest, bringing with it preparations for both planting and a June wedding. Olivia, with Rosa's help, transformed her simple cabin into a bridal bower, adding curtains and quilts and small touches that would make it a true home until after the wedding, when she would move into the main house. "Are you nervous?" Rosa asked one afternoon as they sewed wedding clothes. "About married life, I mean." Olivia considered the question honestly. "Not about loving Beck or being loved by him," she said. "But sometimes I wonder if I'll be a good enough ranch wife. There's still so much I don't know." Rosa patted her hand. "You've learned more in 9 months than most city women would in years. Besides, marriage isn't about being perfect, it's about being perfect for each other." The day before the wedding, an unexpected visitor arrived, a leaner, Olivia's friend from Boston, having made the long journey west to stand with her friend on her special day. "I couldn't let you marry without a familiar face to witness your happiness," Alina declared, embracing Olivia tightly. "Although I admit I was skeptical when I heard the circumstances. Jilted, then taken in by a rancher. It sounded like something from a dime novel." But after meeting Beck and seeing the evident love between them, Alina was quickly won over. "He looks at you like you're the sunrise after the longest night," she told Olivia as they prepared for bed in the cabin. "Not at all like Maxwell used to look at you." "How did Maxwell look at me?" Olivia asked, curious. Alina hesitated, "Like you were a prize he'd won." "Beck looks at you like you're a miracle he never expected." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the valley resplendent in spring glory. They married in the same church where Olivia had once stood abandoned, reclaiming the space with new, joyful memories. Billy stood proudly beside his uncle, responsible for the rings and taking his role with utmost seriousness. When the minister asked Beck to recite his vows, he took Olivia's hands in his and spoke from the heart, without notes or preparation. "Olivia, I was a man half living before you came into my life. You brought light and laughter back to our home, hope back to my heart. I promise to honor and cherish you all the days of my life, to be faithful and true, to share your burdens and multiply your joys." His voice deepened with emotion. "And I'll spend every day making sure you never doubt you're loved, completely and without reservation." Tears shimmered in Olivia's eyes as she made her own promises, sealing them with a kiss that drew appreciative murmurs from the gathered townspeople. The celebration afterward was joyous and lively, with dancing in the town square and enough food to feed an army. As evening fell, Beck drew Olivia away from the festivities, leading her to where their horses waited. "Ready to go home, Mrs. James?" he asked, the new name bringing a fresh wave of happiness. "More than ready," she replied, letting him lift her into the saddle. They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, the future stretching before them as vast and promising as the star-strewn sky above. And as Beck helped her down from her horse, gathering her into his arms for a kiss that spoke of passion long restrained, Olivia knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be. "Welcome home," Beck whispered against her lips, and the words held all the promise she'd ever needed. In the years that followed, the James Ranch prospered along with its inhabitants. Billy grew into a thoughtful young man who eventually attended college in Denver, returning with new ideas for expanding the ranch operations. Beck and Olivia weathered the challenges that came their way: drought years, harsh winters, cattle rustlers with the steady partnership they'd forged from the beginning. Their family grew to include 2 daughters and another son, filling the once quiet ranch with laughter and activity. Abigail visited often from San Francisco, becoming a beloved aunt figure to the children and a dear friend to Olivia. On their 10th anniversary, Beck surprised Olivia with a small silver locket containing miniature portraits of their children. As he fastened it around her neck, his hands still strong but gentler with the passing years, he repeated the promise he'd made on their wedding day. "I told you I'd spend my life making sure you never doubt you're loved," he said, pressing a kiss to the sensitive spot beneath her ear. "Have I kept that promise, Olivia James?" She turned in his arms, taking in the face she knew better than her own, the lines around his eyes deeper now, silver threading through his dark hair, but his gaze still holding the same warmth that had first captured her heart. "Every day," she assured him, rising on tiptoes to brush her lips against his. In 1,000 ways, spoken and unspoken, Beck smiled, the full, unreserved smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "Good," he said simply, "because I intend to keep right on doing it for the next 50 years. "Only 50, Olivia teased. "You're setting your sights too low, cowboy." His laugh was rich and deep as he pulled her closer. "However long we're granted then, every day a new chance to love you better than the day before." As twilight settled over their land, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Olivia reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her here. The humiliation she'd felt standing in that church doorway in her ruined wedding dress seemed to belong to another lifetime, another woman. Sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as disappointments, she thought, watching Beck as he moved to the porch railing, his profile strong against the sunset. And sometimes the words spoken by a kind stranger on a rainy night become the foundation of a lifetime of happiness. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Beck asked, turning to find her watching him. Olivia crossed to join him, slipping her hand into his. "I'm thinking how glad I am that Maxwell Holloway was a coward," she said honestly, "because it led me to the bravest man I've ever known." Beck's arm came around her shoulders, drawing her against his side where she fit perfectly, as she always had. Together they watched the last light fade from the sky, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them as they had faced everything else side by side, their love a shelter stronger than any storm.